Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. 3 of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. We're going to start with a specific angle on the State of the Union address. I'll assume you either heard enough of it yourself or have heard enough coverage this morning of the speech in general. We're going to look at this as a big national campaign kickoff speech for the 2026 midterms and how it intersects with concerns that Trump will be doing everything he can to suppress Democratic votes. Our central clip from the speech, funny enough, and we'll play it right now, is where he references Zohran Mamdani in a mostly positive way as Trump is urging Congress to pass the so-called SAVE Act, which would require proof of citizenship documents to register to vote. And that's not just for immigrants, by the way. And then government IDs when you show up to vote, and a nationwide ban on most mail-in ballots. Trump actually called this part of his hour and 47-minute speech perhaps the most important part, so let's take him seriously and at his word. Here's that clip.
And no more crooked mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, military, or travel. None. And this should be an easy one. And by the way, it's polling at 89%, including Democrats, 89%. And even the new communist mayor of New York City, I think he's a nice guy, actually. Speak to him a lot. Bad policy, but nice guy. Just said they want people to shovel snow. They got hit hard. Wants them to shovel snow, but if you apply for that job, you need to show 2 original forms of ID and a Social Security card. Yet they don't want identification for the greatest privilege of them all, voting in America. No, it's no good.
All right, that from the State of the Union. With us now, Ari Berman, Mother Jones National Voting Rights Correspondent. He's the author of the books Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It, and his classic from 2015, Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. His latest Mother Jones article critiques the SAVE Act as a show us your papers bill. Ari, thanks for coming on. Welcome back to WNYC.
Hey, Brian. Great to talk to you again, and always appreciate the classic references.
Well, you heard that clip. What do you make of the comparison the president made between the ID you need to get hired as a snow shoveler in New York and to vote to determine who runs the country?
Well, I mean, I think it's an apples to oranges comparison, right? Because voting is a constitutionally protected right. So it's different than being hired as a snowman. It's different from needing ID to buy liquor or to get on a plane. There are higher bars you have to clear in terms of what's required for voting, because there's a history in this country of suppressing voting and putting barriers in front of people's ability to vote. And of course, the bill that Trump wants passed is much bigger than voter ID. It really is a show your papers law requiring a passport or a birth certificate to register to vote. And that is far more onerous than simply having to show, for example, a driver's license to cast a ballot.
Well, Trump referenced the proof of citizenship for registration and verification ID when you actually vote as having overwhelming public support. I looked it up, and he's right on those two things. For example, a Gallup poll just before the 2024 election found photo ID to vote at 84% approval and proof of citizenship when registering for the first time at 83%. Do you think this is a losing issue because it seems too much like common sense to people and the fight for securing the right to vote should concentrate on other things?
Well, I think you should separate the voter ID provisions from the proof of citizenship provisions, because I don't think that most Americans are familiar with what proof of citizenship would mean. It makes sense that voter ID is popular because most people have a driver's license, but requiring a passport or a birth certificate to register to vote, those are things that Americans don't carry around with them on a regular basis. 21 million Americans don't have ready access to their citizenship documents, but that really understates the number because there could be a much higher percentage of people affected. For example, 69 million married women who took their spouse's last name could have a hard time registering to vote because their birth certificate has a different last name than their current documents. That's a lot of people. And by the way, that constituency leans more Republican than Democrat. Also, the requirement is that you have to show your citizenship documents in person at an elections office, which if you live in a rural area, you could have to drive a long way to get to your elections office. And so there are burdens associated with proof of citizenship that I think most Americans are not aware of. So while it might poll well, I think that once something like this would go into effect, it would burden more people than I think the average American realizes. For example, when Kansas passed a law requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote, it blocked 1 in 7 Kansans from being able to register to vote. If you blocked 1 in 7 Americans from being able to register to vote, that would be millions of Americans who would be unable to register.
Yeah. So people probably don't realize that this isn't just for immigrants who become naturalized citizens, right? Since, as you say, many people listening right now don't have their birth certificates handy, would have to send away for a replacement since driver's licenses don't count at registration time. And people always bring up what you mentioned, married women whose birth certificates have their maiden names, but all their current IDs have their husband's last names, so they wouldn't match. What about the attack on mail-in ballots? Who's that aimed at?
Well, that's not polling. I guarantee you that's not polling at 85%. It's not even something that I think would be popular among many Republicans, because the fact is a lot of people use mail-in voting. It's heavily used in many Republican states, places like Florida, places like Utah. One of the reasons that Trump did better in 2024 was that his campaign and Republicans decided to use mail voting in higher numbers. And that's why the smart Republican strategists don't want Republicans to ban mail-in voting. That's why it's not actually in the Save America Act, because it would be counterproductive for them to be able to do. So Trump is really fixated on this because of what happened in 2020. But the fact that people used mail-in ballots in larger numbers because of the pandemic, and Trump perceives that's why he lost. Now, I don't believe that is why he lost, but he's fixated on that. But the fact is, mail voting is secure. It's popular. It's used by a lot of Americans, and it's something that Americans rely on, whether they don't want to wait in a long line to vote, or they're elderly and they can't get to a polling place, or they live in rural areas where it's harder to access a polling place. There's any number of reasons why you'd want to vote by mail. And in lots of states, places like Utah, places like California, places like Oregon, Washington, elections are almost entirely by mail, and they run very smoothly.
Why do you think, just again to cite the president's own words from the speech, that this was perhaps the most important thing to him in the State of the Union address?
I think the president is very worried that his party is going to lose the midterm election, and he's fixated with the mechanics of voting to be able to prevent that happening. The first thing he did was try to persuade all of these Republican-controlled states to redraw their districts mid-decade, which was really unprecedented. That has not turned out as well for him as he hoped, because Democratic states like California fought back. So now he's trying to change the mechanisms of voting in other ways. He's saying he wants to nationalize elections. He's saying that he wants to take over voting in at least 15 places. He's saying he wants to raid ballots. I mean, they've taken the ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, which is really a dramatic escalation of his administration's weaponization of law enforcement. And now, of course, he's fixated on this bill, the Save America Act, that's moving through the Congress. It's likely to fail in the Senate. And then he's promised an executive order to do many of the same things, which I have full confidence would be ruled unconstitutional, like his previous executive order. So I think that Trump is just fixated on needing to somehow change how Americans vote to prevent Republicans from losing in the midterms.
Demographically, do Democrats vote that much more through mail-in ballots? And the proof of citizenship, which, would seem to apply across the board, like we said, not just to recently naturalized immigrants, but to any American. Would that hurt Democrats in terms of eligibility more than Republicans for any reason? Either of those things, that or mail-in ballots?
Well, Democrats use mail voting more than Republicans now, but that's only because Trump demonized it so much in 2020 and afterwards. Before that, mail voting was more popular among Republicans. It was Republicans in places like Florida that really pioneered the use of mail voting. So there really wasn't a stark partisan breakdown on mail voting in terms of until recently when Trump started attacking it. So if you banned mail voting now, it would hurt Democrats more. But that's only because of how Trump has talked about this with his supporters. When it comes to proof of citizenship, yes, if you look at the data, for example, the constituencies that have been most affected by proof of citizenship laws in other states have been people that registered for the first time. So that's younger voters, people that may be lower on the socioeconomic aisle, voters of color, for example. But as I said, the way the Save America Act is written, it could actually hurt Republican constituencies more because married women who change their names, for example, they're more likely to be Republican women than Democratic women who took their partner's names. Rural voters that have to drive long distances to register to vote at an elections office and show their documents there, they're going to be more likely to be Republican. So there's a lot of unintended consequences here. And I'm not sure that Republicans have completely thought this through in terms of trying to surgically target how Democrats are voting. The other angle here, Brian, is that when you put barriers in front of people to vote, it generally hurts those people that are less motivated to vote in the first place. This is going to be an election in which Democrats are more likely to be motivated to vote than Republicans. So if you put new barriers in front of people, Democrats may actually be more likely to jump through hoops to cast a ballot because they're motivated to vote in 2026, whereas Republicans who are kind of on the fence already about voting in the midterms may just say, I don't really want to bother. So in a lot of ways, I think the bill could hurt Republicans more than Democrats.
We're getting a few stories from listeners in texts. Listener writes, proof of citizenship also amounts to a poll tax. A copy of a birth certificate in New York City cost me $17 and change. A renewed expired passport cost $130. And another person writes, I needed to request my certificate of birth abroad a while ago. It took the State Department 4 months to produce it. So just some of the impediments that requirement would impose. I want to let people in on a little behind the scenes thing that's been going on during our conversation. And my guest, if you're just joining us for another few minutes, is Ari Berman, voting rights correspondent for Mother Jones, as we talk about the part of the State of the Union address that President Trump called perhaps the most important to him last night in the speech. Behind the scenes, Ari and I have been looking at SCOTUS blog because it was possible that a major voting rights decision was going to come down this morning. It did not, so that'll be for another day. But Ari, you want to tell people what this voting rights decision that we're waiting for from the Supreme Court is?
Yeah, we're waiting for a huge decision that could concern the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act as it pertains to redistricting, and particularly districts that are drawn to boost minority representation, which are known as majority-minority districts, districts in which Blacks or Hispanics or other minority groups have a majority. And that kind of district was drawn in Louisiana. A second majority Black district was drawn there pretty recently. And Republicans in Louisiana are challenging the constitutionality of that. And this is a really important decision because if the Supreme Court were to strike down this part of the Voting Rights Act, it would allow Republicans in southern states, and particularly possibly elsewhere too, to eliminate these majority-minority districts that are overwhelmingly held by Democrats. And so that's a real wild card in terms of the midterms, because this could allow Republicans to pick up a number of new seats, perhaps a dozen or more, depending on when the decision comes down. And also, the Supreme Court has repeatedly already weakened the Voting Rights Act, something that we've talked about at length on this show. And this would, if they were to weaken it again, it would essentially make the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the most important civil rights law in the history of the country, a dead letter.
So here's one more clip of the president from last night on the topic of voting. And this one, we just have to say, is a lie that is historically intended to undermine faith in electoral democracy at all and enable authoritarian takeovers. But you'll recognize it. Listen.
The reason they don't want to do it, why would anybody not want voter ID? One reason, because they want to cheat. There's only one reason. They make up all excuses. They say it's racist. They come up with things you almost say, what imagination they have. They want to cheat. They have cheated. And their policy is so bad that the only way they can get elected is to cheat. And we're going to stop it.
So now we're back to the 2020 stolen election lie, Ari, but he's applying it to any election that a Democrat wins. Should we just shrug that off as Trump being Trump, or can it actually be destructive to American democracy?
It can be very destructive to American democracy because it leads to more destructive outcomes. For example, seizing ballots in Georgia, threatening to take over elections, putting new barriers in front of Americans' ability to cast a ballot, building support for things like the insurrection. I mean, this is all premised on a lie that there is widespread fraud in American elections, which we know is not true, and an even bigger lie, which is that non-citizens are voting in large numbers to sway American elections, which is even more untrue. I mean, all the data shows that the cases of voter fraud in the country writ large are very small, and the cases of non-citizen voting is even smaller. And so that's why states are really resisting what President Trump wants to do, which is basically a federal takeover of elections in a number of different ways. And every state has some kind of security in terms of how you vote. I'll just take, since he mentioned New York, Brian, I mean, in New York, we just have to verify our signatures when we vote. But even that kind of fraud would be very hard to pull off, because if I wanted to vote in the name of Brian Lehrer, for example, I would have to know, Brian, where you live, what your address is, where your polling place is, what your signature looks like. I would have to not be recognized that it wasn't you, and all of that to change one vote. It doesn't actually make any rational sense why someone would try to do that, and it makes no rational sense why someone who is here as a non-citizen, whether legally or illegally, would risk fine, prison, possible deportation to cast a ballot. And that's why every single study shows how rare this is.
Just don't try it, buddy. Just don't try to vote as me, or you're going to be in big trouble. Last thing. I guess a devil's advocate question on some of this. Republicans argue that these things, voter ID, proof of citizenship, mail-in restrictions, would restore faith in elections, even though they're the ones who've been tearing away at that faith. But they argue this would restore faith in elections because those rules would end the controversy. 30 seconds. Why not look at it that way?
Well, if someone wanted to propose some kind of grand bargain where you had ID, but then you also had access to mail voting, access to early voting, something like that, then I think Democrats might be willing to entertain that. But the fact is, people have lost faith in the system because Trump and his supporters keep lying about what's happening with voting. And so I think the quickest way to restore people's faith in the electoral process is to ensure people that the system is secure, that it's safe, and to stop demonizing your opponents and to stop spreading baseless lies about the electoral process. To me, that's the quickest way to restore people's faith in the integrity of elections.
Ari Berman, Mother Jones' national voting rights correspondent. He's the author of the books Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It, and his classic from 2015, Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. Ari, thanks for coming on with us for what the president called perhaps the most important part of his State of the Union address on this morning after. Thank you.
Always great to talk. Thank you, Brian.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Now we'll talk with two WNYC reporters about two major stories from the last day that converged in a surprising way. Mayor Mamdani's unannounced meeting with President Trump at the White House and the detention and release of a Columbia University student by ICE. We might have seen the meeting coming Tuesday night when Trump gave Mamdani a shout-out at the State of the Union.
And even the new communist mayor of New York City, I think he's a nice guy, actually.
This week marks 4 years since the start of the war in Ukraine. A new Oscar-nominated film tells the story of an American journalist shot and killed by Russian troops.
It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, to keep documenting the murder of my brother. But I knew without a doubt that's absolutely what Brent would have wanted me to do.
Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC.
Speak to him a lot. Bad policy, but nice guy.
And 2 days later, without any notice, Mamdani was in the Oval Office. That same morning, yesterday morning, ICE detained Columbia student Elmina Agayeva in a questionable way. By the afternoon, she was free. With me now to talk about this meeting between the mayor and the president and the events at Columbia are WNYC and Gothamist reporters Bridget Bergen, our senior political correspondent, and Arya Sundaram, who covers race and immigration. Bridget, Mamdani surprised us all with this an unannounced meeting between him and Trump yesterday. What do we know about how this meeting came together?
Well, we know that it didn't appear on either of the officials' public schedules, but it had been scheduled in advance. And the mayor was headed to D.C. to talk about housing. That was the agenda for the meeting. Some of these other issues that we're going to talk about also came up in that meeting. But it's something that they wanted to, it was a follow-up to their initial meeting back in November. As our listeners would probably recall, that was a meeting that went, I think, shockingly, surprisingly, bizarrely well. And people were really taken with the chemistry that seemed to be between the mayor and the president, particularly the extent to which the president seemed to lavish praise on Mamdani, calling him a rational man. And one of the things that they had talked about in that meeting was how they would work together to build things, to do big projects for New York City. And that was very much the agenda that was on discussion yesterday.
A little behind the scenes here. Usually the press knows Mamdani's schedule for the day. The mayor's press office sends out an email early in the morning so that reporters know what they want us to cover. Yesterday, that email was empty. They kept this meeting secret. After the meeting, we got this photo. Maybe people, you've seen it. Trump and Mamdani in the Oval Office. Trump is grinning, holding up two Daily News front pages. One is the real legendary 1975 front page reading Ford to City, drop dead. The other is a mock-up that apparently Mamdani's team made reading Trump to City, let's build. Bridget, why would Zohran Mamdani give Donald Trump that kind of photo op?
Brian, game knows game. I mean, talk about a queen's son knowing what a queen's son would love. These are two elected officials who are truly experts in political theater. The Mamdani administration, I think, recognized the extent to which our president, who has, grew up here in New York City, who was a creature of tabloid culture, would be just completely enamored with seeing this headline. And as part of their pitch for this huge housing development at Sunnyside Yards in Queens, a proposal that I should note initially emerged during the de Blasio administration, they mocked up this front page, Trump, to City, let's build. And you see the president holding these two props beaming, just absolutely beaming. And Mayor Mamdani, who, we often see with this huge smile on his face, with a much more reserved expression. I think it was political theater of, top form and a real strategy to get at the psychology of this president, someone who wants to be seen as a builder, who's thinking about his legacy. We're constantly talking about projects that he's doing, whether it's the ballroom in the East Wing of the White House or putting his name on the Kennedy Center, or even putting his name on Moynihan Station or Penn Station here in New York City.
Right.
So I think it was a real strategic move to appeal to the president's tabloid sensibilities.
Meanwhile, while this meeting was happening behind closed doors at the White House, another story was breaking here in New York. Aria, walk us through what happened at Columbia University yesterday morning.
So as far as we know, according to Columbia, there were 5 federal agents who entered an off-campus residential building around 6 a.m. and arrested a student there. Her name is Eli Agayeva. And Columbia says that these federal officers didn't have any warrant, that agents misrepresented themselves, gained entry by saying they were police searching for a missing child. DHS has refuted some of this, and I'm sure we'll get into some of those contentions later on. But either way, Ellie was arrested, and swiftly by noon, there was this massive protest at the campus gates with dozens of people, about 200 people if I had to count, demanding ICE off their campus and pointing some of the blame at Columbia administrators. And by the evening, she was released, after Mayor Mamdani had requested her release in this meeting with Trump.
I want to read from an email that University President Claire Shipman sent to the entire Columbia community. A student forwarded this to me. It says, "Our understanding at this time is that the federal agents made misrepresentations to gain entry to the building to search for a, quote, missing person. It is important to reiterate that all law enforcement agents must have a judicial warrant or judicial subpoena to access non-public areas of the university, including housing, classrooms, and areas requiring Columbia ID swipe access. An administrative warrant is not sufficient," unquote, from University President Shipman's email. So what is the university saying about what ICE agents did, and how does, maybe you want to make that distinction between when they're supposed to be able to go into a space and not?
Sure. So Columbia says that that the federal officers didn't have any sort of warrant, that they misrepresented themselves, that they said that they were police searching for a missing child. And DHS, on the other hand, has said, that their agents specifically verbally identified themselves, visibly wore badges around their necks, and that the building manager and her roommate let their officers into their apartment. They didn't mention anything, by the way, about whether they claimed that they were searching for a missing child. So DHS has refuted some, but not all of what Columbia has put out there. And
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, the distinction between a judicial warrant and administrative warrant is important, right? Because a judicial warrant is signed by a judge. It has more authority. But again, Columbia says that they didn't have any warrant in this case.
The Claire Shipman email continues, "If law enforcement agents seek entry to non-public areas of the university, ask the agents to wait to enter non-public areas until contacting public safety. Public safety will contact the Office of the General Counsel, the lawyer for the university, to coordinate the university's response. Do not allow them to enter or accept service of a warrant or a subpoena." And so that's, pretty detailed and strong language from the university president about how to resist ICE if you don't think they're there legitimately. And here is Shipman speaking to the press.
"This was a frightening and fast-moving situation and utterly unacceptable for our students and staff. We started work immediately to gain her release."
So, Bridget, back to you and the Mamdani White House meeting. Did the mayor get the Columbia students sprung?
Well, we know that the mayor did talk to President Trump about the Columbia student, as well as 4 other students who have faced immigration cases. And following that meeting, the mayor's office issued a statement saying that Mayor Mamdani received a call from President Trump assuring him that the student would be released. So it certainly seems as though the mayor was successful in, at least in this instance, helping someone get out of detention.
Here's a text, Bridget, that just came in from a listener, critical of the way Mamdani is playing, if that's the right word, the president. It says, "Mamdani is normalizing a tyrant." Have you heard that critique from anybody else, anybody in the political sector, that by playing nice with Trump, Mamdani is somehow normalizing him, not just getting specific things for New York?
I think that there are people who are more critical of the mayor's interactions with the president based on some of those very concerns. Even as we talk about the instance of getting this one student released, this is an issue that we have seen obviously across the country, but certainly in broader respects here in New York City. It's very good news for this individual student that she had such a strong advocate in the mayor who was speaking directly to the president. I'm not sure that makes for a policy that those beyond that individual can feel comfort in. I was talking to some sources in the city council who raised concerns about a staffer named Rafael Rubio. He's been held by ICE since January 13th when he didn't show up for work. There were questions about whether he came up in conversation when the mayor spoke with the president. I asked that question of City Hall and I did not get a response, but I think it speaks to the fact that this is not necessarily a policy. This is advocacy on behalf of individuals. And then given everything else we're seeing coming out of the federal government, there are still these incredible warning signs of things that are to come. The only thing that will really change it would be an election. And even in that instance, there are some huge warning signs about things coming for our elections.
Aria, tell us more about Eli Agayeva, the student who was detained. What do we know about why she was targeted?
Sure. So Eli is a citizen of Azerbaijan. She's in the School of General Studies, pursuing a degree in neuroscience and political science. And that School of General Studies generally caters to non-traditional students who are often older than typical undergraduates. She entered the U.S. around 2016 on a visa, at least according to a habeas petition filed by her attorneys. And DHS says that her visa was terminated in 2016 for failing to attend classes. But we haven't heard back from her attorneys about what they say about this contention at the moment.
But the school says that she's currently attending classes?
The school says that she's a student in the School of General Studies.
But would it have just been being out of status from an old student visa, or did they have some other political motivation, like they did on some of the Columbia students who participated in or were leaders of the protests in 2024?
That's a great distinction that you draw here. DHS is not saying that Eli Elmina was a participant in pro-Palestinian protests like many of the other Columbia students who were detained by ICE in the past, like Mahmoud Khalil, Mohsen Mahdawi. But instead, it seems like she was targeted for an entirely different reason. And if she was involved in pro-Palestinian protests, that at least certainly hasn't come up from DHS in recent memory.
This is probably outside of either of your beats as a political reporter and an immigration reporter, but a listener asks in a text, the ICE agents actually showed two security guards, Columbia security guards, a phone photo of the fake missing person. That is, they claimed they were looking for a missing person, but apparently they were just looking for the student. So the listener asks, is impersonating a police officer a crime? Have you heard anything about this? Bridget, can I throw that to you?
Sure. I think impersonating law enforcement is something that is a crime. I don't know that we have confirmed exactly the circumstances that took place there. I've also read reports that they were showing a picture of this alleged missing person. But I think this raises a lot of questions for the NYPD as well, right? This is, it would be that law enforcement agency that they would be purporting to be. And so that raises new issues between the relationship with local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, something that I would note, if we think back to what we saw on the ground in Minneapolis, became a particularly contentious issue. So hopefully not foreshadowing of something we may be seeing more of here in New York City, but certainly something to be on high alert for.
And depending what can be proven that the ICE agents did actually do there, it might put the ball back in Mamdani's court as to how much he wants to push enforcement of anything that might have been illegal done by a representative of the president. WNYC's Aria Sundaram, who covers race and immigration, WNYC senior political reporter Bridget Bergen on the Trump-Mamdani White House meeting. Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and now we'll continue our membership drive series on finding your personal style with help from well-dressed people who think seriously about what we wear and why. You might say that today's guest set herself up for a kind of experiment. Amelia Petrarca, author of the fashion and style newsletter Shop Rat, describes her newsletter as one fashion writer's attempt to get offline, go outside, and engage with style in real life. Now, part of that has included something she called Repair Month, where instead of buying something new, she focused on maintaining and fixing something she already owns. So what happens to your sense of style when you stop consuming it as content and start experiencing it as lived reality? Amelia joins us now. Welcome to WNYC. Thanks for doing this with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And listeners, not a lot of time for calls here, but we can squeeze in a few if you think you're on point. Have you changed the way you think about style by paying more attention to real life, the clothes you actually see people wearing outside your home, rather than just seeing it on social media? What did you notice, and what did seeing somebody else actually wearing actual clothes in real life world affected, how it affected how you dress? 212-433 WNYC. Call and tell us a story. 212-433-9692. Amelia, you want to start with the thesis of your newsletter, Shop Rat? What does that mean?
Sure. So I was a staff writer on the internet for a very long time and was tasked with writing many trend reports about trends that came up on TikTok, whether it was strawberry girl summer or tomato girl summer. And I just felt that it was totally divorced from what I was seeing in my daily commute on the subway or walking down the street. So I went freelance about 3 years ago, and I just wanted to I became a middle of the day New Yorker, which means that I could just walk around New York in the middle of the day, that I wasn't chained to a desk. And I wanted to document what I was seeing people wearing out and about rather than online.
So when you began spending more time observing how people actually dress on the street at events in everyday life, what surprised you?
I think it was two things. I saw a lot of creativity. I think, especially now with all the snow and slush on the ground, it's a great example of, you see people tying takeout bags around their boots so that they don't get wet, or you just see ingenuity in New York, especially with commuting. People need to get from A to B, and they find their own interesting ways to do that. That said, on the flip side, I also saw a lot of patterns. You notice things on the subway. You notice people gravitating towards the same maybe style of snow boot or jacket or color of jacket. So it was really fun to notice patterns in the wild rather than being fed these sort of quote unquote trends that are happening maybe in people's living rooms or on their computers.
So what's an example of what you called Repair Month? Focus on mending and maintaining your own clothes that you had last month. What did you do, for example?
Sure. Well, something very important that came out of Repair Month is I learned finally how to sew a button, which really changed some pieces in my wardrobe that I had just completely abandoned. They were, stuffed in the back of my closet just simply because I didn't take 5 minutes out of my day to repair them. So that was a really important one. I feel like this is still relevant because it's cold, but I learned a lot about caring for knitwear. And this woman told me to treat your sweaters like your pets, which I've been thinking about all winter long, that they're these living, breathing fibers that you really should treat as such.
Let's take a phone call. Aretta in Asbury Park. You're on WNYC. Hello, Aretta.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Very long-time listener. I'm a vintage clothing dealer. I have been for almost over 20 years. And when I find really beautiful handmade items, I tend to not sell them, and I tend to keep them, sort of have a very curated closet. I store them, I preserve them. And like I said, I'm turning 50, and I'm thinking this stuff needs to be worn carefully, of course, but I don't want to just keep it and preserve it. I want to wear it with style and enjoyment of real life.
Amelia, you want to engage with Areta at all?
I love that. Yeah. I mean, something I learned, especially about knitwear. So I'm thinking, if something's hand, maybe it's maybe hand knit or something like that. Wearing it does take away some of its life, but also if you don't wear it, then it doesn't have a life at all. So I think wearing it is, you want to take it out, maybe not wear it every single day, but like a sweatshirt or something. But I think that stuff should see the light of day.
Areta, thank you very much. Did you want to add something, Areta? Go ahead. Especially at the right moments.
Say, you want to wear these things carefully and in the right moments.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Can you give us a quick example, Amelia, of seeing something in real life on a person as you were walking around town that you then wanted to adopt or adapt for yourself?
Ooh, that's a great question. This is going to sound silly, but I've spent my whole life avoiding the color blue for some reason. I never connected with it, never liked it. And I've been seeing a lot of blues, but also pinks and asparagus, like very bright, sort of almost Easter spring colors. And I think with the weather and everything, I've been inspired to finally wear blue. So I bought my first blue sweater the other day, and now I'm converted.
If you don't like blue, you would probably throw my whole closet or half of it in the trash. One more, Sarah in Chappaqua. We got about 20 seconds for you, Sarah. Hi, real quick.
Hi. So I love people watching. I'm always looking at what people are wearing and how they move when they wear it. And I was in the city recently. I'm a huge fan of clogs. I just wear clogs every day. And I saw this woman, and she had the most beautiful shade of raspberry clogs. And I've been looking for that shade ever since. I bought 2 pairs. They're red, not quite that shade, but I'm still hunting for them.
Very niche. Raspberry, the raspberry shade in particular. We just had this whole debate on the station about what shade of green a T-shirt is, Amelia. So can you identify raspberry? We have 10 seconds. Raspberry clogs.
I love raspberry clogs. I would suggest looking on Etsy. I feel like they have a large selection of clog shades on that site. But I was listening to your debate, and I think you got to go with the classic moss green.
And there we leave it with Amelia Petrarca, author of the fashion and style newsletter Shop Rat. You can find it on Substack. That was fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.